Hello, and welcome to another Ask a Maker Educator. I'm Danny from Maker Ed, and I am super excited to be here again with all of you. And we have a exciting group chat today. We have a couple museum educators, a couple wonderful folks from across the United States. We have Jacie Hood from Fort Worth, Texas, and Devon Dill from Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. And I will let them introduce themselves in just a second and tell you a little more about the work they do. If you want to join the conversation, you can follow along on Twitter using hashtag #AskAMakerEducator and ask your questions there, or submit your questions on our website on the Ask a Maker Educator page. So join in, chat away, join the conversation. Jacie and Devon, I'll let you introduce yourselves. Devon, tell us a little about yourself and what you do.
Sure. So I work as the coordinator of the Make Shop at the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. Our space specializes in bringing in families and children to explore real materials. So we use everything that professionals use in their working environments. And we have a very skilled set of teaching artists that help facilitate different activities and different really just like interesting workshops and that kind of thing with the families and the things that we provide.
Awesome. Jacie.
All right. My name is Jacie Hood. I am the Public Programs and Innovation Studios Manager at the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History in Fort Worth, Texas. And that really long title basically means that I help manage everything from large-scale public festivals all the way down to the galleries, innovation studios, where we do the bulk of our maker programs. So we use 4 different flexible use spaces that we reconfigure to do a lot of our maker programs, and might be in a different space every month. And we also have a large-scale maker festival coming up on April 1st called iMake, that we're really excited and gearing up for right now. So everything from camps and classes and little drop-in workshops to iMake, we we do a lot of maker programs in the area where I work.
Awesome. That is very exciting. I'm very excited about iMake. I'm excited to hear how that goes. Museums are such awesome, wonderful, unique spaces. For both of you, what do you really enjoy? What stands out about designing maker learning experiences for museum environments?
It's a real treat to work in a non-traditional learning environment. I really enjoy being able to facilitate with families and visitors who are excited to be there, who are excited to learn, and who are able to take their own agency over their learning experience to a certain extent. So that's really, it's a fun time being able to interact with families on that level, where they're there because they want to learn. They're there because they want to experience new things, and you can really provide that for them and dig in to the deep stuff.
Definitely.
A couple things that I find really exciting about it. One is the flexibility. I love that we have the opportunity to really try new things, to work with large groups of people of all different ages and experiences. One of the big things that comes along with that flexibility that I really enjoy is willingness to deviate from original plans. So we might have somebody that comes in that's really excited about a rabbit trail that we hadn't really thought about exploring in an activity, but we're willing to pull out those supplies that they need to keep exploring that experience that they find really intriguing. And so that opportunity to be flexible in the environment that we have is really exciting to me. And I also love the challenges that come along with being in such a space that has such a broad audience. So the challenges of trying to take what we want to teach and boil down these main concepts that we want to make sure everybody walks away with is also very exciting for me as an educator, to think on a higher level about what we're teaching and why we're teaching it and how we're going to teach it.
Yeah, those are some super big things.
Yeah. It's really lovely being able to work with such a great team of people who are working along the same lines you are, and being able to develop those activities that visitors are going to engage with as well. We have a lot of creative freedom when it comes to the activities that we're going to share. So that's really, really special to me.
Definitely. How do you handle some of those challenges? Because I mean, that's definitely one of the most exciting and unique things about a museum space is that diversity and that you get people from all different backgrounds and communities and ages. But that's a big challenge as someone who's designing learning experiences. So how do you approach that, and what steps do you take as educators to handle that?
Do you want to bounce off of that, Jacie? You cut out a little bit, Danny, when you were asking that question, so I didn't get all of it.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll jump. So, of course, the issue of trying to work with such a diverse audience in the broadest sense of the word is, in my opinion, one of the largest challenges of working in a museum space.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we take into consideration when we're working with activities is something called multiple entry points. So like I was mentioning earlier, if you take what you're trying to learn and boil it down to a few main concepts and kind of look at it as an educational Maslow's hierarchy of what we want people to learn, we're able then to better scaffold activities to different points where people with different experiences can jump into that activity and still have something that they're going to be learning and engaging with, but something that's not going to be inappropriate for their experience level that they're at. And something else that we also take into consideration is universal design. Mm-hmm. So we've got to think about people that have different abilities to do these activities, people of different backgrounds, what personal experiences they have, and how that might affect their experiences that they'll have working with us in our maker spaces. And so, of course, you can never plan for everything. So you just do the best you can. And I think as long as you keep that as a goal in your mind while you're planning, you're going to prepare for a lot of the problems that you're going to face. And as long as you're flexible, like all museum educators are, you'll be able to adapt to those changes that you weren't necessarily anticipating.
Totally. Do you have, just off the top of your head, projects or examples or things that stand out as you thought of it one way, you thought it was going to, flow very well, and then you had to shift quickly based on the audience that actually was at the museum that day?
Oh goodness. I'm trying to think of a good example of this. I would say sometimes when we are working with digital technologies, mm-hmm. This happens fairly frequently. So we think, awesome, great, we're going to do coding with 7-year-olds. And we get in there, and there are 7-year-olds that come in that don't have the language skills yet right. to know what words are that we're trying to type. And so we have to kind of refocus the experience level that we're working with and what are our new goals, and quickly kind of shuffle those. Or we might have a guest come in who is ESL, and they might not necessarily understand the coding that we're doing using English words. And so you have to very quickly adapt to those things. And so digital technologies, yes. Physical tools are also an issue sometimes if there are guests who don't have the manual dexterity to utilize certain things. And so you've got to try and find ways to adapt those tools to their physical needs.
Yeah, that happens a lot in our space when we're working in like the workshop area where we have sharper tools, more sort of dangerous activities, where those activities can definitely be scaffolded. But we'll start a day out soldering and thinking, it's a weekend day and we're going to get an older population of kids who are able to really like dig into it. And it's all 3-4-year-olds. So we suddenly have to change it to, wire bending or something that, addresses fine motor skills or something along those lines, that we take away the soldering irons and we're able to still facilitate with the young ones, but still using, hard metal, things that like these kids don't have an opportunity to play with in other environments. So,
yeah. And do you find that you get to hit on some of the same skills or find new approaches to, or new approaches to the same problem, I guess I could say? Is that an interesting challenge for you as educators? Clunky question.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to something specific, like the example of soldering, it's just a different, it's a different set of skills that they're learning. Whereas, on one level with the older kids, you're learning material or a tool, And for the younger ones, you're learning how something feels. You're learning what your hands can do. You're learning what shapes you can make with the bent metal. So they're separate experiences, but like mushed together in the same activity.
Totally. Another thing that I find super exciting about museums is the fact, and I know from talking to both of you that this is exciting for you as well, the fact that you can design activities that really stretch across different subjects and disciplines and that can touch on a lot of different things. And so I'd love if both of you can share your experiences designing those types of activities and maybe some examples of projects that you've come up with that kind of do touch on a variety of those different disciplines or subjects or topics.
Yeah. A lot of our activities are very process-based from start to finish. So we'll start at the very beginning of a building process to the very end. And across that spectrum, we'll experience a lot of different specific activities. One of our great examples would be circuit block making. So we explore circuitry. We make a set of circuit blocks out of old electronics. That the beginning of that process is taking those electronics apart, using a screwdriver, finding the motors and the bits and pieces that will make up that activity. So kids will be apart old printers, seeing what's inside of something, really like getting into it. And then the next step will be getting all of those materials onto the actual circuit blocks. So that involves cutting wood. It involves hammering nails. It involves hot gluing or soldering. And at the very end of it, we have a set or a kit that kids can learn about electricity with. So we touch on, 5 or 6 different disciplines in that one activity. And this could take a whole day if we're in a workshop or an outreach somewhere, or this can happen as people visit the museum, and we'll have one part of it happening in one section and another part happening in another, so they can experience it on their level.
Totally.
Awesome. So this is a topic that we've been thinking a lot about here at the museum recently. We did a talk about interdisciplinary making at a conference a few weeks ago. And what we kind of boiled it down to is when you're trying to create activities that cross disciplines, and I don't mean just within making. We also touch on things like history and art, math. And so the 3 points that we like to make is, 1, use what you know. You don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. So if you have content experts in certain areas, use them. The people that you already have on staff, the skills that you already have on your staff. The second thing is use what you have. So I will literally go into our closet and just look at what supplies we have a lot of and say, I want to do an activity with X item. What can we combine it with to make something new that crosses disciplines? And the third thing is use who you know. What community connections do you have? What content experts outside of your organization can you bring in to create something across disciplines that you know and they know to make something that's new? And so taking those 3 pillars, you can really come up with some fantastic ideas that don't break the budget for your organization, and really rejuvenate staff to let them use skills they already have, but learn something new at the same time, and create new ideas that are really going to be engaging for your audiences. And so when we are creating these activities, the first step, of course, is that brainstorming. Using those 3 pillars, what do we come up with? And then in the second step, once we start researching and developing the activities, that's usually when we start bringing in our content experts to help us develop them. Third step, really important, piloting the activity and giving your staff time for group play. And in this area is really where you're going to see your staff take ownership of the activity. You'll see a lot more organizational buy-in as they have an opportunity to experience the cross-disciplinary learning. And then finally, refining your activity in the end, using that feedback from the group play to make the activity better before you present it to the public. And so through that, we've had a lot of success. We've developed some great animatronics programs that combine everything from storytelling to paper crafting to circuits and coding. We do chainmail, which at first glance seems like a really straightforward activity, but there's a lot of math and pattern recognition involved in it. There's a lot of history you can talk about, where chainmail was used, where it came from, the different types and why they were utilized, and even the science of the anodization of the aluminum wire, how it gets its color. So we can either take an activity that's already been done and find the ways it's cross-disciplinary, or we can use that process to create something new. And it's really exciting. You should try it.
Yeah, that's super exciting. And I wouldn't say anything about chainmail as a straightforward activity. That's a super cool. I was very excited when I saw you online making chainmail with kids. I would never have thought of that. So that's very cool. We got a few questions actually from on Twitter earlier today, and I am happy to say that you actually touched on a lot of what looks like at Miss Chantel was wondering about. They put out some questions around the role of faculty. And so, Jacie, I'm hearing that it's not just faculty, but also community members and all these other people that are within the world that you work in are so important in designing these activities, it sounds like.
Yes, definitely. So we were actually inspired to do the chainmail activity by a community member I know. I saw his work and I thought, wow, wouldn't this be fun? And so we actually brought him in, and he taught me the activity. He actually came in and worked with guests for a day, and it was a really strong connection. Our animatronics that I mentioned earlier, we have a content expert in that field that works at a local high school, Dr. Ginger Alford, who we bring in and helps us develop activities. So these connections that we have are incredibly valuable to us and allow us an opportunity to make connections within the community, build up the skills within our staff, and I feel like they also give a lot of validity to the activities, letting the public know that we have experts who are teaching us. We're using correct information, we're using current information, and doing it in the best practices of the field.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Devon, do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So on the floor at the museum, the Children's Museum, we have a great staff of teaching artists. And we try to hire people who all have different backgrounds. So as I started out as a teaching artist at the museum, and my background's in photography, and we have somebody else, their background's in history, someone who their background's in music, someone their, art, studio arts, engineering, women's studies. So we have a really solid group of people working together and collaborating and sharing their experiences and teaching each other. And at the same time, we'll bring in guest artists and members of the community, like Jacie said, to help teach our staff members what they don't know, and to also facilitate with the kids as well during museum hours. So
that's super cool. Yeah, this same user asked, what are some of the essential tools and resources for a startup makerspace? And right now, I mean, it sounds like the most essential tools are the people, more than any physical resources I've heard either of you talk about. Would you say that's a fair assumption?
Absolutely.
Yep. So it sounds like you have a lot of amazing freedom in the museum, and that's really great. What are some limitations you've come up against? What are some areas where you've been challenged and not been able to, maybe push these activities in the way that you want, or, just the general sense of limitations you might have come up against?
Some of the things we've touched on earlier, just about facilitating things for older age groups, things that may be dangerous for younger ones that don't yet know how to navigate that kind of space around those tools. One of the biggest challenges we've had lately, especially this time of the year, is group seasons. And so we get a lot of groups and field trips coming into the museum. And it can be really tough trying to have a meaningful interaction with a visitor in such a short span of time. These groups are here for 15 minutes, a half an hour, and there's 30 to 40 of them in the space at one time. So we're constantly trying to figure out ways to not only engage those visitors, but keep our staff engaged as well. And that can be very tricky. So we always try to develop activities that have you can put out, and they can be not as facilitated, perhaps things like block games or exploring gears, or circuit blocks are a great one when we put them out. Things that can soak up a lot of people. But the challenge there is, finding that meaningful facilitation, an interaction.
Yes, I would say there's several different levels of limitations that we face. One of which is just institutional restrictions, like if because of insurance, you can't use anything that creates sparks or flames. Or our physical space, we don't necessarily have the ventilation to be able to do certain activities. We had to buy a whole lot of soldering fume extractors in order to even be able to do soldering in our space. Yeah. And so physical limitations, depending on what sort of space you have to do making, can be a huge restriction on what tools you can use and what activities you can try. And I definitely agree with Devon that one of the biggest limitations is time. Because a lot of the visitors coming to your space aren't necessarily there just to do your maker activity. They want to explore the whole museum, and they may only have an hour or two to get through 10, 15 different exhibits. And so you have to find ways to build your activities to work at a 10-minute interval, a 20-minute interval, a 30-minute interval, depending on how much time people are able to dedicate to those activities. But at the same time, some of those limitations, I think, really force us to be very efficient in the time, very safe in the way that we practice these activities, and really reinforce that flexibility, being flexible within your institution. And so you can try and look on the positive side.
Always
Yeah.
A good place. Awesome. We have time for, I think, one more question. And this one is fairly open-ended. Since we do, we're trying to get as many different maker educators as we can to think about making and do all this wonderful work. I'm wondering if your museum experience, where you have been able to push the limits and try such awesome new things, has led you to have any advice or thoughts that you can give to educators in other spaces that are in schools or libraries or after school spaces. Any last minute pieces of advice or wisdom?
I guess, as I was saying before, like the bulk of the makerspace is the people that make it that way, and like the teaching artists and the facilitators. And so my advice would be to communicate and collaborate with your coworkers. They're your team members. They want to play just as much as you do. It's a constant learning environment. So it's not just the visitors that are learning, it's you that's learning as well. And you can only do that by playing and innovating and exploring as much as you can, and trying to put away that time, if you can, to do that. We have an hour every morning before the museum opens where we just sit with each other and, either talk about what we're going to do that day, or talk about our learning practices, or what we can do differently, or how an activity can be facilitated differently based on what happened yesterday. So that time that you have together is really valuable.
Definitely.
All of these spaces, whether they're museums, schools, clubs, libraries, we're nonprofits, we're educational, we all have a mission that we're working towards. And so I think it's really important to consider that mission, and let that be something that's always in the back of your mind, because number one, that's going to give you the motivation that you need to get through times, but it's also great to have as your driving force behind giving you that motivation to want to try new things, to want to keep innovating and providing these amazing experiences for your audiences. And so once you've got your goals and your mission in mind, you can look at your limitations and think about how can we work around those to keep getting towards that mission. And I think as long as you stay focused on that, you're gonna be okay.
Awesome. It looks like it's a bit of we have a question that has been in our question inbox It might have been from a different session, but it actually is so relevant that I feel like we have to throw it in and go a little long. Based on your experience, you get to hit on an age group that some folks don't get to see that often, which is the teenagers, those older kids. Do you have some advice or thoughts around how to make maker education something that's really relevant to them from what you've seen? Any thoughts around that before we close out for the day?
Show them something they haven't seen before. Mm-hmm. It's really doable. Like in schools and traditional learning environments, they don't get to see, they might not get to solder. They might not get to see Scratch or Hummingbird or a different kind of programming. So yeah, try to show them something that they haven't seen before.
Cool. I love it.
Don't try to make it cool for itself. Because a lot of times when we see the older kids that come in, they don't want to immediately participate in it. But let the activity speak for itself. Give them creative freedom. Give them time to make it something that they're excited about. Give them that time to process it and let it grow on them. And they'll get excited about it. But you've got to give them that time and don't force it on them. Let them grow into it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a great chat and a lot of fun. Next week, we are actually taking next week we are not taking a break. Next week, we have another awesome episode with David Wells from the New York Hall of Science. And after that, we will be taking a little bit of a break from our episodes. We've just taken 1 week off, so don't worry. Jacie and Devon, thank you both so much for joining us today. We will be sure to share out resources and links to both of the work that you're doing, to the iMake Festival, to all the wonderful learning resources from Make Shop and Children's Museum of Pittsburgh, and anything else that you both send to me and want to share. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next week.